attempt to read from this book. I don't know if I'm going to be able to do it or how long the batteries will last or if Michael's even going to let me. But anyway, it's called When God Whispers Our Name by Max Lucado. It's just a lot of his different thoughts, you know. And then there's this man that was cleaning a hallway, and he was a janitor, and he heard a voice from a mop bucket, and come to find out he had murdered a man, and he ran just like Moses did back in the day. And at first he thought the voice was a joke. Some of the fellows on the third floor played these kinds of tricks. Henry, Henry, the voice called. Hank turned. No one called him Henry anymore. Henry, Henry. He turned toward the pail. It was glowing, bright red, hot red. He could feel the heat 10 feet away. He stepped closer and looked in. The water wasn't boiling. This is strange, Hank mumbled to himself as he took another step to get a closer look, but the voice stopped him. Don't come any closer. Take off your shoes. You are on holy tile. Suddenly Hank knew who was speaking. God? I'm not making this up. I know you think I am. Sounds crazy, almost irreverent. God speaking from a mop bucket to a janitor named Hank? Would it be believable if I said God was speaking from a burning bush to a shepherd named Moses? Maybe that one's easier to handle because you've heard it before, but just because it's Moses in a bush rather than Hank in a bucket, it is no less spectacular. It sure shocked the sandals off Moses. We wondered what amazed the old fellow more, that God spoke in a bush or that God spoke at all. Moses, like Hank, had made a mistake. You remember his story, adopted nobility, an Israelite reared in an Egyptian palace. His countrymen were slaves, but Moses was privileged, ate at the royal table, educated in the finest schools. But his most influential teacher had no degree. She was his mother, a Jewess who was hired to be his nanny. Moses, you can almost hear her whisper to her young son, God has put you here on purpose. Someday you will set your people free. Never forget, Moses, never forget. Moses didn't. The flame of justice grew hotter until it blazed. Moses saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew slave, just as like Hank killed the mugger, Moses killed the Egyptian. The next day, Moses saw the Hebrew. You'd think the slave would say thanks. He didn't. Rather than express gratitude, he'd express anger. Will you kill me too? He asked. Exodus 2:14. All right, you little twerp. Come on now. Here, go get it. Go get it. Go get something. Here. Go get your chihuahua. Here, go get it. Go on. Oh. Moses knew he was in trouble. He fled Egypt and hid in the wilderness. Call it a career shift. He went from dining with the heads of state to counting heads of sheep. Hardly an upward move, and so it happened that a bright, promising Hebrew began herding sheep in the hills, from the Ivy League to the cotton patch, from the Oval Office to a taxi cab, from swinging a golf club to digging a ditch. Moses thought the move was permanent. There is no indication he had ever intended to go back to Egypt. In fact, there is every indication he wanted to stay with his sheep. Standing barefoot before the bush, he confessed, I am not a great man. How can I go to the king and lead the Israelites out of Egypt? I'm glad Moses asked that question. It's a good one. Why Moses, or more specifically, why 80-year-old Moses? The 50-year-old version was more appealing, or the 40-year-old version was more appealing. The Moses we saw in Egypt was brash and confident, but the Moses we find 4 decades later is reluctant and weather-beaten. Had you or I looked at Moses back in Egypt, we would have said, this man is ready for battle. Educated in the finest systems in the world, trained by the ablest soldiers, instant access to the inner circle of the Pharaoh, Moses spoke their language and knew their habits. He was the perfect man for the job. Moses at 40 we like, but Moses at 80, no way. Too old, too tired, smells like a shepherd, speaks like a foreigner. What impact would he have on Pharaoh? He's the wrong man for the job. And Moses would have agreed. Tried that one before, he would say. Those people don't want to be helped. Just leave me here to tend my sheep. They're easier to lead, leading sheep. Moses wouldn't have gone. You wouldn't have sent him. I would not have sent him. But God did. How do you figure? Benched at 40 and suited up at 80. Why? What does he know now that he didn't know then? What did he learn in the desert that he didn't learn from Egypt, or in Egypt? The ways of the desert, for one. 40-year-old Moses was a city boy. Octogenarian Moses knows the name of every snake and the location of every watering hole. If he's going to lead thousands of Hebrews into the wilderness, he better know the basics of desert life 101. Family dynamics for another. He's going to be traveling with families for 40 years. It might help to understand how they work. He marries a woman of faith, the daughter of a Midianite priest, and establishes his own family. More than the ways of the desert and the people, Moses needed to learn something about himself. Apparently, he had learned it. God says Moses is ready. All right, little twerp, go on. And to convince him, God speaks through a bush. Had to do something dramatic to get Moses' attention. School's out, God tells him. Now it's time to get to work. Poor Moses, he didn't even know he was enrolled. But he was, and guess what? So are you. The voice from the bush is the voice that whispers to you. It reminds you that God is not finished with you yet. Oh, you may think he is. You may think you've peaked. You may think he's got someone else to do the job. If so, think again. God began doing a good work in you, and I'm sure he will continue it until it is finished when Jesus Christ comes again. Did you see what God is doing? A good work in you. Did you see when he will be finished? When Jesus comes again. May I spell out the message? God ain't finished with you yet. Your Father wants you to know that, and to convince you. He may surprise you. He may speak through a bush or a mop bucket or stranger. Well, still, he may speak to you through this book. And what I'd like to do is just read a few of these things on a, every day or something, because I've found myself in here, you know what I mean, and that's what I want to do. And so anyway, God bless you, and I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll read some more when the batteries let me. Bye. Oh, see, it's still going. What are you doing? Hey, that's Mommy's. Can I have it? Okay. God bless.